this workshop on Islamic wills, inshallah. We'll start the session by the recitation of the Quran. For that, I request Brother Zahud Chima to start, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أقيم الصلاة لدلوك الشمس إلى غسق الليل وقرآن الفجر إن قرآن الفجر كان مشهودا. وقل ربي أدخلني مدخل صدق وأخرجني مخرج صدق واجعل لي من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. أقم الصلاة لدلوك الشمس إلى غسق الليل وقرآن الفجر إن قرآن الفجر كان مشهودا. وقل ربي أدخلني مدخل صدق وأخرجني مخرج صدق واجعل لي من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. وننزل من القرآن ما هو شفاء ورحمة للمؤمنين ولا يزيد الظالمين إلا خسارا. وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. آمنت بالله صدق الله العظيم.
So inshallah we'll start the session. The purpose of today's session is to clarify some of the important aspects related to the Islamic will and the different sections of it, different components of it. So inshallah, you would have received a copy of the will. We'll go through its section. So we have organized the presentation in a way that we go through all the sections in the will, inshallah. So if you want to complete it along with the explanation, please feel free. If you believe that you need more time to think about it, focus and complete it at your home, that's fine too. But inshallah, we'll explain all the sections of the will and go through them one by one, inshallah. First of all, I'll introduce myself. I'm basically a student of knowledge, and I have been studying under various scholars. So I have done a few courses from Islamic Online University. Also, I've done a few courses from Ar-Rayyan Institute, and I've also studied under a few teachers like Maulana Fazlur Rahman from Pakistan and a few other teachers. So I've been studying with them and trying to gain knowledge. So the reason I'm standing here today is because I did a course with one of my teachers, Mufti Imtiaz Jadoon from Pakistan, the course on the Islamic laws of inheritance, which we call Ilmul Faraid. So in that course, we covered all the different ways in which the Islamic inheritance is distributed. So after the course was finished, my teacher asked me that now you have to transfer it to other people. So I was here in Australia, so I thought maybe we can do a session so that we can transfer that learning. But then some of the friends suggested that those things in the exact same manner might not be very suitable for the audience over here, because not many people would be calculating the shares themselves and so on. So it is better that we cover about Islamic wills rather than the method of calculating the different shares. So on the basis of that, we did our first session in the Dawa Center, which used to be in Kennington, which is now ICRO Center. So when it used to be Dawa Center, we did our first session there. Then we also did a session at Masjid Ar-Rahman, and we also trained a few people from other states, and that is our third session, alhamdulillah, in WA. So that's a little bit about me. So I'm just fulfilling the mission or the task that my teacher gave me. So that's why I'm standing in front of you. These are some of the snaps of the previous workshop that we did. The one that we did at ICRO Center was in coordination with Sheikh Hisham, and we also gave our presentation and our material to him, which he also uses sometimes. Now, you have received a document which contains the Islamic will. It's a valid question that you can ask, how has this will been formed? So in order to form that will, what we have done is that we have studied the Islamic wills as well as the generic wills produced by a number of different organizations. Around 25, 26 wills we collected and analyzed them and identified their components. And in each will there are some things which are good and there are some things which need a little bit of improvement. So what we have done is that we have gathered the best possible combination, and then we have come with this one. And this will we have got it reviewed from the experts of law as well, and also some other people who have proofread it. And also in the process we have consulted with quite a few people. So you are free to use this will. We do not charge anything for this service because we only do it for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our reward inshallah is with Him. We are not seeking any worldly gains out of it. So you are free to use this will. It is also okay if you just want to understand today that what are the components of an Islamic will, and then you can get it made from other places, that's fine too. It's entirely up to you. But we have no issue or no cost associated with you using our will, inshallah. And the participants who have registered it through an email address will also send a copy of our will and the attached schedule, as well as this presentation onto that email address, inshallah. So you can use it later on as well. And just like our other publications, so this workshop is organized by Islamic Circle of Australia and New Zealand. We also produce a few books on a regular basis, like we have produced a book on the Islamic rulings regarding Aqiqah. We have also written books about Akhlaq, the Islamic mannerism and other aspects. So none of our books contain any copyright. And this will is no different. So you can use as you like, you can forward it to people that you like. So we have no problem, no objection to that, inshallah. So the first question is that why should you be interested in Islamic wills? Why should you write a will? And the answer to that is threefold. One of the key reasons, the main reason for us is that it is commanded by our Master, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It is commanded by him, and we have no choice. When he has asked us to do something, we have no one to have our own opinion. So that is why we consider it our legal responsibility, religious responsibility, that we should make an Islamic will. Also, it might be important to realize that in Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us various rulings. But there are some rulings about which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has strongly emphasized. And it is the aspects related to inheritance about which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Farizatun min Allah." That it is indeed very important obligation upon you. So we cannot take this matter lightly. That is why we want to do this session on Islamic will. Also, it is our duty as Australians. The government strongly emphasizes people to write wills, because in the absence of will, it is the government who has to manage a lot of things on behalf of the disease. So the government wants us to write the wills too. So that is why we are in this session. And then it's the community spirit as well. In the absence of will, there can be a lot of complications with regards to the guardianship of the children, with regards to the distribution of the estate of the disease. So all these things can be avoided if we have got a properly written will. So these are some of the benefits of why we should consider writing a will. Now, before we go into the details of what we are going to discuss today, there are three important aspects that we have to keep in mind when attending this session. And these are basically different roles that you guys will come across. The first role is as a testator. And testator is the person who is making the will. So the person who is making the will is called testator. If we are writing our will, we are in that position. We have to know what we are writing in that piece of document and what does that mean. So we have to know about that. The second role is as an executor. Executor is the person who basically implements what is written in the will. So some of you would be the executors as well. For your spouses, for your friends, they would nominate you as an executor of their will. So you have to know what are your responsibilities and what are your limitations as an executor. So we have to keep that role in mind as well. And the third aspect is as a trainer as well. So you might need to communicate it to others as well. For example, if you are here and your spouse is not here, you might need to communicate this to your spouse as well. Because the will, both the partners have to write together. So just like how we file the text, so we are obliged to file the text, so is our partners. And same is the case with the wills as well. So husband as well as wife have to write the will. So you might be communicating the requirements to others as well. Testator, executor and trainers would be the three roles which you should feel yourself into when attending this session. And as I mentioned previously, just think yourself to be in that role, to be in that position, and that way you will be able to grasp more things and you would like to clarify more things. So what is a will? So will is clearly defined in law and it comprises of these aspects. In your will, it's a document in which you can specify your burial wishes, who your estate should go to. What is estate? Estate is whatever the disease leaves behind. The disease leaves behind, that is called estate. Like your assets, like property, like your artwork, like your other possessions, they would be your estate. So when you see this word further ahead in this presentation, it would mean whatever the disease has left. That is called estate. And then you can mention who will distribute it on your behalf, like the executors, you can mention them in your will. And who would be the guardian of your minors. These are some of the things that you can mention in your will. If you feel that there is any question while we are going through that, please stop me and ask so that we are all clear on what we are discussing, inshallah. Okay, now some of the reasons why you should make a will. As we already discussed, it's our religious responsibility. You can communicate your burial preferences. If you don't communicate that and the government is unaware of that, then they can decide whatever way they want to dispose of your body. And I'll go through some of the details of what are the different ways in which this aspect is taken care of. So it's very important that you should communicate the way you want your body to be handled. And then you can nominate the persons who would administrate your estate on your behalf, and that is the executor. You don't want an unknown person to do that on your behalf, and there are reasons for that. Because all the estate that you leave behind would immediately get transferred to an executor. If it is not your spouse, if it is not the person who you want to administer your property, it could be someone else who you don't know, and your wife, your kids, your husbands wouldn't be able to access what you leave behind. It would be in some person's hand who has got the legal time frame of 12 months to distribute that. So you have left a lot of money, but your heirs wouldn't be able to access it. So it's very important that we should very wisely choose our executors so that they can expedite the distribution of the estate. Also, we want the estate to be distributed Islamically, because all the possession in this world we would leave behind. What we will take with ourselves is what we have done for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's very important that we should distribute our estate Islamically. Also, we can avoid excessive legal fees. If we do not nominate an executor, there are some bodies which can become the executor of that will, but that is a very costly exercise. They would charge huge sums from your estate. Rather than that money going to your heirs, it would go to those legal bodies who would charge very hefty fees for being the executor of your will. So it's important we can avoid these things by leaving a clearly stated will. Also, you can benefit the charitable causes through your will, and we will go through that and explain some of those aspects. Because all that we do in this world will come to an end after we die, except the charitable causes, except the ongoing charity. So this will is your last chance, last opportunity to do something, to spend in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before leaving this world. Also, we can discuss whether we can or can't donate the organs so that when you leave, your body part will still be benefiting someone, would still be a reason of someone being alive. So we'll discuss that aspect as well. Also, we discuss if we nominate a guardian for your children and establish trust for the minors. And we'll discuss what does a trust means for the minors. Okay, why make a will? I present a hadith in front of you, a beautiful hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he says, it is the duty. As we mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about inheritance, فَرِيضَةٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. Nabi Kareem ﷺ is also saying that it is a duty, it is an obligation of a Muslim who has anything to bequest, that not 2 nights should pass unless he has got a will written with him. So all of us have got something to bequest, something to give or pass on to our heirs. So 2 nights should not pass before we should have a will written in front of us. So when Ibn Umar heard about this hadith, he said that I did not let any day pass without me having a will with me. So that's how important it is. Similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, the interpreted meaning of that is in front of your screen. It is prescribed for you. When death approaches any of you, if he leaves wealth, that he makes a bequest to parents next of him according to reasonable manners. This is duty upon al-muttaqun, the pious people, the God-fearing people. It's a responsibility upon them. Now, some people might say that this is the verse which was abrogated later on. So this is the beauty of the Quran. The verse was abrogated in Islamic countries. Like over there now we have got the defined shares of inheritance. So you don't have to explain specifically what you want to give to your parents and other relatives. But in the countries like where we are now, it is still applicable. It is still valid. If you don't leave a will, then it means that you are not mentioning the share that they are supposed to have. So it's mansukh in some countries, it's abrogated in some areas, but still valid in here. Similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, when Allah's command has come, Allah's command and Allah's messenger's command has come regarding some matter, then it is not for the believers to have their own choice. So when the ruling or the command has come from the Prophet, then I and you, we don't have the power to decide. We have to follow what has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messenger. And it is unfortunate that 50% of the Australians do not leave a valid will. 50% of the Australians. And there is a huge sum that is vested with the government that no one is there to claim. They did not leave a will. The heirs couldn't be identified, and there is a huge millions of dollars which are with the government, and there is no one to claim them. We don't want it to happen to our money, our hard-earned money, our well-spent money, that no one is able to access that. We want our heirs to be able to access that in accordance with how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messenger has commanded us to distribute that. Okay, when should you make your will? Should you make your will when you are really old, or should you make it now? If you are really sick and doctors tell you that there is very little possibility of you surviving a few months, should we leave our will till that time, or should we make it now? There is a legal aspect to that as well, and there is an Islamic aspect to that as well. So legally, we have to make a will when we have got the ability, when we have got the thinking ability of what we are writing. Because there have been cases in Australia among the Muslim families where the will has been contested and challenged, and the court, and they have won the cases. They challenged the will and they won the case because they said that our mother or our father made the will when they were not in the right frame of mind. They were really sick and they were not able to properly explain what they wanted, and that is why the will has to be nullified. And it was done by the children of Muslim families, just because they wanted more share out of their thing. So these things can happen. So we have to make a will when we have got the ability to understand what we are writing and what we are signing, and when we don't have any restraint in front of us. So that is the right time to make a will. And obviously we have to be above the age of 18 to be able to make a will. Now some of the things that we are discussing would be aligned to the WA Wills Act 1970, which is applicable in Western Australia, where we are doing this session. But there are other Wills Act as well, which are available in other states. So each state has got their own, but they are not very significantly different. They are more or less the same, and there have been studies done by the expert who say that they can be a combined sort of approach in that regard. So we are discussing WA, but we know that some people are attending this session from other states, and also we have got some participants who are attending this session or who will be attending this session later on from other countries. So they can go through their own laws, but what we are discussing is mainly what is applicable in WA, which according to our research is not significantly different from what is applicable in other states.
Excuse me.
Yes.
The previous slide, you said about the valid, there is expired date for the
Sorry?
for that this valid will.
Yeah.
You said there is an expired date for that.
For the will?
For the will.
No, there is no expiry. So there would be certain conditions in which the will will be revoked, but we will go through the conditions, inshallah. So this is legally that the wills, certain wills were challenged in the court because when the person who wrote the will, like it was a very old lady and she was extremely or terminally ill, and her sons brought a will document in front of her and she signed that, didn't understand what was written in that, and she was not in the best of her health. So on the basis of that, her daughter or other people challenged the will and the will got revoked. Islamically also, the ruling is that when you are not capable to make a will, you should not do that. When you are not capable of doing something, then it is not acceptable. Similarly, the will of the minors is not acceptable. So this is where law and the Islamic law align fully. Now, many people ask the question that does the will need to be on a particular format? The answer is no. And that is why you would see a variety of formats. You can go to the post office and you can get a small booklet, the will booklet. But I have observed that and I have studied that and I have found a few problems in that, a few mistakes in that, which can basically mean that your will can be null and void if you do those mistakes. So there is no prescribed format. What you have to do is you just have to comply with whatever is written in the law, and as long as you fulfill those requirements, there is no particular format. Also, you can have a will written on a piece of paper. As long as it meets all the requirements, all the witnesses and the signatures and so on are there, then again that can be considered a legal will. So there is no particular format. Now, what is a valid will? What are those conditions that make a will valid? So these conditions are specified in the section 6 of the WA Wills Act 1970, and similar conditions are specified in the acts for New South Wales and other states. So let's go through them. First thing, the will has to be in writing. It cannot be a verbal thing that I gather two people and I say in front of them that this is my will. It has to be written if it has to be considered something legal. It has to be signed by the testator. But if the testator does not have ability to sign, someone else can sign on behalf of the testator as well, and the testator should approve that. So that can happen. The testator makes or acknowledges the signature in the presence of at least two witnesses who should be present at the same time. It cannot happen that I sign my will here, then I go to Brother Hissam's house and ask him to be a witness, then I go to Brother Ismail's house and ask him to be the second witness. All of us have to be available together when this activity is happening. So the testator and both the witnesses have to be together and they have to sign in front of each other. Now this is for the wills that are applicable in WA. There are some additional requirements for international wills. So when we come to that section regarding international wills, we will have more discussion about that, inshallah. Alterations in the will. Now your will would have certain components which you wouldn't like to have. For example, you might not like to donate your organs and so on. So you would cut those clauses. So whichever alterations you make in the will, it has to be signed by the testator as well as the witnesses. Though the witnesses and the testator are signing at the bottom of page every day, but if you make any change to that, at that place also you have to acknowledge. The reason for that is that if you don't have that, what would happen is that anyone can alter the will and there's no need for signature, but they can add or remove whatever they like. So with every change, you have to sign it along with your witnesses. If there is any change in your will which does not have those signatures, the will will be considered null and void. So it's very important, rather than risking our will, we should make sure that we comply with this requirement.
Excuse me?
Yes, please.
Sorry, right.
Yes.
With regards to the optional clauses, is there a list maybe of the numbers? Which ones are the ones that you can cross
We'll
out?
go through, inshallah, all of this. So in this, there is nothing basically that we think is optional. But it's up to you, like if you want to remove something, you can just cross it and sign it. So we'll go through all the components and then you can assess if that one is optional for you or not.
Very good question.
Yes, please.
The witness, the executor can be a witness?
We'll go through the detail of who can be a witness, but it's better not to have the executor as a witness. And also it is better not to have your beneficiaries as your witness. Like if I'm giving some gift to one of my friends and I make him the witness as well, they can be conflict of interest. So witnesses should ideally be neutral people. Witnesses, the section on witnesses. So, first of all, we'll see the Islamic perspective. The Islamic perspective says that when the time of the death comes, and we have to give some wasiyah, we should have at least two witnesses present in front of us. So that's what Islamically we are obliged to do. And the law is not much different. The law says, present with two witnesses and identify to them that the document is your last will and testament. So you have to tell them that this is my final will and testament. Then you and the witnesses must sign at the bottom of every page. It's not a legal requirement, but a lot of experts say that you have to do it at the bottom of each page. Why? Otherwise anyone can insert additional pages to your will or remove a few pages and then you wouldn't have a clue. So sign at the bottom of every page And at the end of the document, again, we have to sign and date the document. And witnesses should see a sign, and we should all be present together. Another safety factor that some of the experts mentioned is that we should all sign using the same pen, so that the court has got the trust that they were all present at the same time. So you all sign with the same pen. Who can be a witness? A person who is unable to see that the will is being signed, that person cannot be a witness. Now that can happen because of blindness. That can also happen because the person is not physically present. So if the person cannot see that the signatures are being done, then that person cannot be a witness. And that's all that is mentioned in the WWL. It doesn't specify any other thing. But there are factors that we have to consider in order to make sure that if our will is challenged by someone, then we don't lose our will. So there are some safety factors that we have to keep in mind. So witness has to be above 18 years of age. It is dependent to beneficiaries, or I would say executors. Should it be the witnesses as well? Some people think that it's a legal requirement, but we did a research on that and it is not. But it's just a safety factor that we have to keep in mind. And have people that you and your executors know as your witnesses. This is important. If your will gets challenged in court, like we died, and after that we left a will which is being executed, and someone stands up and challenges the will, that there is no share, that my share is not there in the will. And unfortunately, it happens mainly because of our children. So as parents, we should also nurture them Islamically, that whatever our Prophet has told us, that is the final thing, that is what we have to follow. And if you are not happy with that, then that is not acceptable, that is not right. And we should also tell them not just as a knowledge, but also on the basis of the intellectual grounds, that why is that? Why are certain shares being prescribed by Islam? In Islam, for example, all the expenses are to be borne by men. For example, if there's a woman and if your wife earns as well, she is not obliged to spend on the house. Even if she earns, it is the responsibility of the husband to look after the family and to spend on them. And a lot of other expenses. If there is a sister who has got a widow, it's the responsibility of the closest male relative to take care of her. So man has to spend on all these things. It is obliged. When it comes to marriages, men are obliged to give dowry. And Islamically, the father or the family of the bride are Islamically not obliged to spend a single penny. It's just our cultural aspects which are pulling us away from Islam. Islamically, they are not obliged to even spend a single penny. Similarly, when it comes to the newborns, the aqiqah, then it is for the boys that they want two animals that they have to sacrifice, because for them, they have to spend more. But for girls, again, more relaxation is given over there, that even one is enough for them. So you can see that financially, wherever it comes, women are given more flexibility, more preference. They do not have to spend. Islam does not want them to spend. So intellectually, we have to spend to explain to our children why are certain rulings in place, so that they don't start a fight with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger by challenging an Islamic will. But unfortunately, that's a reality. It still happens in Australia and elsewhere in the world. So it comes down to our responsibility as parents. Now, the conditions in which the will can be revoked. If you open the document that we have given you, the first page of that talks about your name, your identity, that how to be identified, your name, your date of birth, and so on. And you can mention your driving number or any other form of identity with that, so that the court knows exactly from whom it has come. Because there would be many people in Australia whose name would be Muhammad Latif. And there would be many in Medellin as well, for example. So you have to specify all the details of who you are, what's your identity number, and so on. And then the next aspect in that is that you revoke all your previous wills. So in the will, you mentioned that with this will document, I'm revoking all my previous wills. And why we have put that clause? It is because of section 15A of WA Wills Act, that any new complete will would revoke any forming of marriages as well as the breaking of marriages. So in case of a marriage or in the unfortunate case of divorce, the will would be revoked. So in that case, you would have to make a new will when you marry or when divorce happens. A new will has to be made. In the case of birth of children, if you have already named your children in the will and a new child comes, then a will has to be made again. But if you haven't named them, then it might be a will. Now, what if you want to change your will? You have written your will and now you want to change it. That will might be with someone, might be with an executor or someone, and now you want to change it. What can you do? There are two options. One option is that you can make a document which is called a codicil. You can make this document, and all this document is that it's an additional thing that you can attach on top of your existing will. Like I mentioned that I want to give my organs in donation and so on, but now I've changed my mind, and the clause, that clause is not applicable anymore. So you attach a codicil to that. But codicils can sometimes be problematic, and they can lead to problems. So the best approach is that you write a completely new will. You write a completely new will, and that is a much better option. So the summary of that is that if you write something in your will and you want to change it, there is absolute flexibility. You can change it. There's no problem with that. All right. Now we come to the section Article 1 of our will, which is about organ donation. So if you go through the document, it says I do or I do not approve the organ donation. So if you choose to donate organs, you can tick on I do and cross out I do not. And then you and the witnesses can sign over there that I do or I do not approve my organ donation. Why should we do that? Why should we think about that? Let's see different perspectives about that. Because all that we should do should be in alignment with the religious requirements. So I'll present in front of you two opinions, and then it's up to you whichever opinion you choose and whichever opinion you like. So before doing that, we have mentioned a little bit about autopsy. What is autopsy? It's basically the inspection of the body in which the body might be cut as well, and then it is inspected and what was the cause of death and so on. So generally it is disliked in Islam because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the interpretation of the hadith, the meaning of the hadith is that whoever breaks the bone of a dead person is the same as breaking the bone of a alive person. So we have to treat the body with respect. So that is why the scholars generally consider it dislike to have an autopsy. But in Australia, there are certain conditions in which autopsy is mandatory, it's required. So the scholars explain that we have to follow the law of the land in that regard. But wherever there is a possibility to avoid that, we should explain that. So that is why in our will, we have mentioned in section 1.3 that we do not approve of autopsy of our body unless it is required by law. If it's required by law, then we will follow the law of the land. Otherwise, generally, we wouldn't like autopsy to happen to our body. I will not read through all of these, inshallah, you will get the presentation, but the summary of that is that in certain situations, the law requires autopsy. For example, a sudden death happens, or you happen because of an illness and you are under care of someone and then you die. So there is a list of situations in which the law requires autopsy to be done. So you can read through that, inshallah, it will come in the email addresses that have come to us. Okay, now let's talk about organ donation. And I'm very passionate about this topic because I feel that a lot of people are suffering because of the decisions that we take in this regard. So I'll explain to you two perspectives. The first perspective is that it is valid, it is permissible. It is permissible to transplant an organ from a dead person to a living person whose life or basic essential functions depend on that organ. If someone is dying because that person doesn't have a working liver, and you have a working liver, and you take it to your grave, and it decomposes over there and becomes dust. So which option should we choose? So the scholars say that the preservation of life is more important. It takes precedence. And that's why Islamically also, when it comes to the matter of preservation of life, certain things which are haram become halal. For example, you cannot eat what is unlawful. But if you are about to die, then that unlawful thing becomes lawful and you eat from that to protect your life. So this is the opinion which is held by the Australian National Imams Council. So they hold to this opinion. Similarly, the Islamic Council of Victoria, they hold to this opinion as well. And a lot of organizations in Australia, as well as most of the scholars in Middle East, hold on to this opinion. And I personally prefer this opinion as well. The other opinion is that it is not permissible. And that opinion is basically with regards to the hadith that I mentioned about the dead bodies, that we have to respect them and we cannot cut them and take the organ out. And that opinion is mostly prevalent in the Indian, Pakistani, Bangladesh subcontinent. So it's mainly applicable there, and it's the ruling of the scholars over there. So these are the two rulings. Both the rulings are based on evidence. And also with this, I would just like to mention a sub-point. And the sub-point is that when the scholars mention something, it is always on the basis of some evidence. The evidence sometimes can be weak or sometimes can be strong, but it is not that they talk about their desires. So in this case also you can see there is a difference of opinion, and the both opinions are based on valid evidences. So you can choose whichever opinion you like. I personally prefer opinion 1, as it is followed by the Australian National Imams Council as well as many other bodies. Just a little bit further explanation of that. There are two very important things that we have to keep in mind. One of the things is called Maqasid al-Sharia, and the second one is called Qawaid al-Fiqh, or the major maxims of the religion. What is the Maqasid al-Sharia? The scholars interpreted all the rulings of Islam, and they identified that Islam is trying to protect a few things. Islam attempts to protect the intellect. The things that make us go out of our intellect, Islam prohibits that. For example, the Prophet ﷺ said that if you are excessively sleepy, then do not offer the prayer, go to sleep. It's about the voluntary prayers, not the obligatory prayers. If you are excessively sleepy, then do not perform those obligatory prayers, but go to sleep. So, if your intellect is not being preserved, you can say what you do not intend, then the ruling is don't do that, go to sleep. Similarly, when it comes to like saving a life, then it is better that you eat something which is unlawful, but save yourself. So Islam wants to save the life, Islam wants to save the intellect, Islam wants to preserve the continuity of the human race. So anything that can go against that, Islam prohibits that. So that is why the Prophet ﷺ said that marriage is my sunnah. And whoever does not follow my sunnah, it's not from me. So Islam tries to protect that. So when we look at the ruling regarding organ donation in this perspective, it leaves very little doubt that rather than decomposing your body parts into grave, it might be better if it can save someone's life. And it has saved people's life. Some of the examples are in front of your screen. And you can see these people range from very young age to very old age. Organ donation has been saving lives. Now that's a very sad fact. And the sad fact is that some of the Muslim patients have to wait for up to 7 years for receiving an organ transplant because the match isn't happening. And the match is dependent on the ethnicity. We can receive from other ethnicities as well, but the best match happens when we receive from the people of the same ethnicity. So, as we don't donate, our Muslim brothers and sisters who are suffering, or the people who come from the same country as us, they do not receive the implants because we are not donating the organs. So, just some of the reasons why we should consider that. And if you want to donate your organs, what you need to do is that you have to go to the Australian Organ Donor Register and then register yourself over there. Just writing it in the will would not be sufficient. If you write it in your will but you are not registered in the Australian Donor Register, Organ Donor Register, then it wouldn't be applicable, even if you write it in your will. So if you are interested, register it over there. If you have linked your Centrelink account with your MyGov account, you can do it from there as well. But that is required in addition to writing it into will if you choose this opinion. Otherwise, you can mention that I do not approve my own donation. So with this we cover our Article 1. With regards to Article 2, it is about the funeral and burial. Now we are mentioning it in the will, but the best place where we need to explain that is to our executors, our family members, our children, that this is how we want to be buried. And I have seen, as we work in the community, sometimes we come across some very painful stories, And there are people whose grandparents were Muslim and the kids are not. One of our brothers made a documentary on the Australian Cavaliers, and he went to meet someone, and there was a lady who brought a little tasbih, the beads on which we do the zikr. So she brought that and said that my grandparents used to do something like that. I don't know what is this thing. No more Muslim. Once a lady came to our house marketing some solar panels or something, and we had a shahada written on one of our walls. And she asked, what is that thing? I told her, this is the destiny of our faith. It says this. He said, my grandfather also used to have something like that. So it's very important to preserve our religion as well as the religion of our children. Otherwise, they wouldn't know what to do with us and how to preserve the iman of their generations. It's the most important thing we should do. Sometimes we get complacent about this aspect, but this is the thing that we should take very, very seriously. Protect our iman as well as the iman of our youngsters. So in our will, we can explain about the funeral and burial requests. So in this regard, one of the important considerations is that the Prophet ﷺ said, that dress yourself in white. فَإِنَّهَا أَطْهَرُ وَأَطْيَبُ, because it is more cleaner and more better and more good. وَكَفِّنُوا فِيهَا مَوْتَاكُمْ, and shroud your disease in white. So this is one of the requirements that we have mentioned in the will, that we should be buried in white shrouds of the simplest type. Also the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith in Sahih Muslim, Asliku bil janazah, that fasten the process of funeral. It shouldn't be delayed for many days or many weeks. Now what are some of the conditions in which it can be delayed? It can be delayed if we have to send our dead body overseas. Some people say that send my dead body to my village where I was born or my city where I was born. There is no Islamic grounding for this. So the Islamic ruling is that asliku bil janazah, do it as soon as possible, do not delay that. So this is what we have to do. And just on this topic, if we have to transfer our body overseas, it cannot just be that it is put in the plane and it is sent to Pakistan or elsewhere. It has to be either embalmed, certain chemicals have to be inserted into the body, which is Islamically haram, or it has to be frozen, which is extremely expensive. And our dead body does not deserve that expenditure to be done on it. As Abu Bakr said, because he commanded that I should be buried in old, worn out clothing of mine. I do not want new shrouds. Because he said that the living are more in need of the money that he would spend on me. So that is why I consider it, I wouldn't say haram, but I do not consider it right to send the disease overseas. With regards to the expenditure of the janazah, it is the responsibility of the husbands to pay for the janazah of their wife, but the wives are not obliged to pay for the janazah of their husbands. So if a man dies, then it has to come from its estate, from whatever the man has left behind. The expenses have to come out of that, unless some community wants to do that as a communal favor. But if a woman dies, it is the responsibility of her husband or father or another closest male relative to pay for the burial expenses of that. Now, these are some of the things that we should consider. All of us have to leave this world. So what we should do is that we should do such things in this world that people remember us when we leave, and they should attend our janaza as well. Because according to the hadith, if in one hadith, according to that, if 3 rows of people attend a janaza, the person will be forgiven. Another one, according to that, the interpreted meaning of that is that if 40 people who do not associate with anyone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they attend a janaza, the person will be forgiven. So we should try and encourage community members to join these janazas that happen in the local community, and also pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that our janaza as well, these people attend, and for any reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive our sins and make us from the people of Jannah. Okay, now with regards to the different disposal methods of the body. So one of the ways in which the bodies can be disposed of is cremation. And it is one of the most commonly prevalent ways of disposal of body in Australia. And what they do in that is that basically they put the dead body into a burner and it gets converted into an ash. So, and it's cheapest, it's around $600 or something. And if we do not clarify our burial rituals, this would happen to us as well, which is completely unacceptable Islamically. Then comes the burial, which is the Islamic obligation. This is what we are obliged to do as Muslims, that we should be buried. Embalmment, putting chemicals into our body so that the body doesn't decompose, and then putting it as a display, and the people are coming, and it's there for a few weeks or a few months. Again, that is Islamically not acceptable. And then the sea burial. Sea burial is only acceptable in Islam in certain conditions. For example, there was a ship and someone dies on the ship. So only in some limited situations the sea burial is allowed. But generally it's not an Islamic practice, it should not be done. We have to bury the deceased. So this is what we have specified in our will as well, that we want to be buried, and we have mentioned that our grave should be the safest one. There should be no colors, no lighting, no music on our funerals, and our grave should not have excessive decoration or ornamentation around that. It should be a simple grave. So burial expense is the first expense that has to come out of our estate. Whatever we leave behind, the burial expense has to be the first thing taken out of our estate. Okay, so when the death happens, because this is not a session on the janaza, this is not a session on the hadith or the ruling related to al-janaiz. So we'll briefly go through that. One of the rulings in that regard is that when the person passes away, you have to get a certificate from the doctor regarding the reason for the passing out of the person, and then that person would be, that certificate would be required for organizing the funeral. So that certificate would be required, and you would be required to present that. So you organize a funeral with the registered bodies. Only the registered bodies can do the funeral in Australia. So we have got the Muslim Burial Help, which can help with the disease as well, and we have got a few brothers who represent that organization as well. And also you can contact the Mirabuka Masjid, so they can help with that as well. And also I think there are a few other organizations which are registered, like I think Islamic Council of Western Australia, led by Sheikh Hisham, is also I think a registered body. So you can contact them and they will brief you about all the requirements. It's ideal that the body should be buried within 24 hours. With regards to the coffins, in Western Australia there is a requirement that the deceased should be buried in coffins. So, coffin is required for burial in WA, and it cannot be opened when it goes into the graveyard. So, legally we cannot open the coffin when we go to the graveyard. What are the rulings Islamically? Islamically, generally it's makruh. Makruh means something which is disliked, but it does not lead to sin. So, Islamically it is considered as makruh. If you can avoid that, do that. If you cannot, then it's not a sin. However, for women, it's preferred that their body should be taken into the coffin and taken to the graveyard. So, in our will, we have mentioned, because laws can change as well. So, we have mentioned that if my body is to be put into the coffin, one of its sides should be open, and it should be filled with dirt unless otherwise the law prohibits that. So if the law prohibits that, we shouldn't do that. But if the law allows, then we have to be, our body has to be in contact with the earth or the soil or the dust. In some cases, using the coffin is like recommended, and that is in the unfortunate case when the body is burned or when the body is torn off, then the coffin is mustahab, it's better to use. Payment for the funerals. So if a person dies, then the banks in which that person has got the account can pay for the expenses there. So you can check the banks what their requirements are, and they might be able to release finances for the funerals and so on. And also some superannuation funds can help with that regard. From the government, there might be a bereavement payment for some people. So if our loved one passes away, then we can check what payments are due for that, and that might be able to help us with the funeral and burial expenses as well. Is everyone still understanding or keeping up with the session? Or is it getting monotonous or boring? If you think that it's getting monotonous, or if you are losing interest in it, or if you are losing a little break, if you need a little break, just let us know and we can take a little pause, inshallah. But it's very important to understand this, because one of the requirements for the acceptance of will is that we should understand what is written in that. If you don't understand that, it can be challenging. Moving on to Article 3. Now we are nominating the executors of our will. Who are the people who would execute our will? Common question. Who can be an executor? I request Brother Hisan to read that first paragraph.
An executor is a person you appoint in your will to carry out your wishes after you die.
So this is what we already discussed, and we will nominate someone who would execute the will on our behalf. The second frequently asked question is, what do the executors do? So I request Brother Shahzad to read this one, the second paragraph.
They deal with your estate, paying your debts and distributing your assets to beneficiaries as set out in your will. An executor is sometimes also called a personal representative.
Who can be my executors? So I request the brother to read that.
An executor can be anyone over 18 who is trustworthy. It could be someone like your spouse, de facto partner, or child.
So I copied it from somewhere, that is why you see the de facto partner in there as well. But Islamically, it's better to have your spouse as your executor. How many people can be nominated as an executor and how? So in your will, you can see that we have made 3 boxes for nominating the executors. If one person doesn't outlive us, then the next person can become the executor. If that person doesn't outlive us, then the next one becomes the executor. So you can put 3 trustworthy people in there who can be the executors of your will. So that if one doesn't outlive you, the other is able to take on the role. Now there are different ways of appointing the executors. What we have done in this will is that we have assigned individual executors. Just one person being the executor, and that person is managing all your estate. But you can also have joint executors, like 2 persons working together to be the executors. But there is a constraint in that. For all the decisions, both these people would have to have their approval, and only then the thing can happen. For example, if you make your spouse as one of the executors, and another person as a co-executor, now both of them have to agree for a thing to happen. Now if your spouse wants something, and the other person is not agreeing, she wouldn't be able to do that, or husband wouldn't be able to do that. So there are some pros and cons of that. Then you can also appoint the executors jointly and severally. So they can either take the decision together, or they can take the decision independently. So there are different ways of doing that. But what we have done is that we have made the sole executors in this will, so that one person is able to do the job of execution. And in that we have given the backup option that if that person is not willing or if that person doesn't outlive me, then this person or then that person. Do I have to pay someone to act as my executor? So if you do not leave a will, then the public trustee or the government nominated organization would become the executor and they would take certain percentage of your estate. So which would become very expensive. So if you don't nominate a will or if you nominate public trustee as your executor, then there are charges for that. You can also request your spouses or relatives or other friends to be the executor of that will, and most probably they would do it free of cost. But if you want to pay them something, you can. Because executing a will is not an easy task. They would have to deal with a lot of organizations, a lot of banks, a lot of government bodies. They might need to sell the property and so on. So it would take a lot of time. So if you want to pay some fee for that service, you can do that as well. So in your will, there is an option. We have mentioned that you would like to pay a certain amount or certain percentage to the executor as a fee. You can mention that, otherwise you talk to your executors and if they are okay, you can mention zero.
In this, the executors don't have to be informed or like there is no signature for
No.
the executor. So,
No, there is no signature for that.
so you can put anyone, but you need to
The
inform.
best is that you talk to them first, and if they're happy and they can take that role, then you give them. The best is that you give it to your spouses. The brothers and sisters who are married, they can put their spouses as the first executor, and then maybe the brothers or other people who they trust, they can put as executors.
But they have to be, for example, if we are living here, they have to be here present.
It's a very good question. So the brother is asking that do the executors we should be living locally or not? So this is a question that a lot of people ask. So law doesn't prohibit that, but you can see that what the executors would have to do. They would have to come here, file all the documents, take your death certificates, contact all the banks, get hold of all your property, file the tax returns on your behalf, and also sell your property and so on. It's a very lengthy process. If you nominate someone from overseas, it would mean that person would have to be here for a few months to be able to do that. And sometimes it can take up to 12 months. Just for the acquisition of the death certificate, it can take up to 2 months or more. So extended period of time. So it's best that someone local should be appointed. So that's best.
What about the children? When you nominate your children,
Certainly.
executor,
Yes, certainly. And that's the best. So after the spouse, children are the best one.
but there will be no conflict of interest if you nominate one executor, one son is the executor, other sons will be inherited.
And legally, it's not, as far as I have researched, legally it's not prohibited, but you're right, in some cases it can lead to a problem. But it's still better than having an outsider, and while that person is doing his job or her job, your family wouldn't be able to access anything. So as far as I have researched, the law doesn't prohibit the children to be executed. Each person.
If you nominate the child, then if he or she is minor, so in that case, what we can do in that way?
Yeah, I think we cannot nominate the minors for the executorship because it's a role which is very, very complex. So ideally the spouse or the adult children.
Sorry, one more. So for those of us that are here by themselves, obviously it's not ideal and it's obviously a burden. You mentioned earlier that it's something that would be costly if it's done through a third party. What's the range of fees?
I'm not 100% sure of the cost that they charge, but like just to make the bill, the cost is around $355 or something, and then they will only make the bill if you nominate them as the executor, and then for that there is a fee.
So the public trustee charges $8,000, but I mean in general,
Yeah.
what's kind of a ballpark?
I'm not sure of how much they charge, but that information can be acquired through contacting the public trustee, and they can let you know the exact amount that they charge. Alright.
If you have like a name and executor, or what is the person to be? That person is fine, or you have to
If you nominate one person on that person's life, or anything that need to happen, so and you didn't nominate any person else, what's
So So if the executor has already started the job, then the executor of that executor would manage both the properties. It would manage that person's executor's own property as well as the property that that executor is managing. But if that executor hasn't started the job, then a person can apply for the letter of administratorship. So for example, a child who is an adult at that time, that child can go to the Supreme Court and request for the letter of administratorship and become the administrator, which is the same one as executor, but you don't have to nominate that. It comes to approval from the Supreme Court. Okay, now some of the factors to consider when nominating an executor. Are they likely to outlive you? So if you nominate like an elder person who's older than you, we don't know when the death is coming, but it's likely that that person might pass away earlier than you. So you can question yourself, can they outlive me? Will they have time and motivation to do what is needed? If it's a third person, a third party, they would have very little motivation in expediting the things and giving the due share to your family. But if it's within your family, some of your family members, like your wife or someone, they might want to do it quickly so that the people can receive their shares. So you can see if they have got the motivation to do the task or not. As I mentioned, it's quite a time-consuming and quite a task that requires a lot of motivation. Will they be impartial if there is any dispute? So that is where that question comes. If the sons have a dispute within each other, do they have some understanding of your assets? So they have to know exactly what your assets are and so on. Do they possess the right skills? So for example, if you nominate a spouse and the spouse doesn't have any legal understanding or doesn't have the experience of dealing with someone, then that can be a problem. So you can nominate someone who has got the right skills as well. Will they be prepared to deal with your assets confidentially and in the way that you want? And do you trust them? So all these things have to be considered, and then you can see who will be the best executor for your assets. So these are some of the documents. Again, I will not go through the complete list. I will send this presentation to your emails, inshallah. And these are some of the things that you would need to give to your executors. So you would need to give them your will, if you have got an enduring power of attorney or power of guardianship, and healthcare directives, insurance policies, house deeds, all those things. So you are most likely to give them to your spouse rather than a third person. So all these documents should be accessible to your executors. They should be accessible to them, and then they can efficiently perform their tasks. Now, in many families, it happens that the wife doesn't know where his husband's superannuation account, in which banks he has account, and vice versa. So we don't know about each other's assets and so on. So it's very important that all these things should be written on a piece of paper, that I have got a piece of land over there, I've got this bank account, I've got my superannuation here, I've got shares in this company and so on. All these things should be available and communicated to them so that they can perform the role of being an executor. Duties of the executors: pay the funeral expenses, taxes and debts, obtain the death certificate from next of kin can apply that, or you can also get it from the hospital. Inform the relevant organizations about the death. Obtain the authorization to manage the estate, which is called the grant of probate, and you can get it from the Supreme Court. Show them the legal will. With that, you have to fill an affidavit, and then the court, after assessment, would approve whether they can give the grant of probate or not. Secure the assets like bank accounts, land, houses, superannuation, and everything. File any tax returns. If there are any pending tax returns, your executors have to file them. Also, they have to file a tax return at the time of your death. That maybe 6 months have passed in this year, so this is what the earnings are, this is what the tax are, and so on. Discuss with the beneficiaries if they can agree on assets that can be distributed without selling. Like if they don't agree, like there's a house and there are 3 people who are the heirs. Now if the heirs distribute that I need this much money and so on, then you essentially have to sell the house. But if they all agree that this much percentage of the share would get into the house, or you take this card and I take this art collection and so on, then they can distribute that way as well.
In the previous slide, you mentioned the executor, you need to have power of attorney.
Not necessarily, but we'll come at the end and we'll discuss about the power of attorney and the power of guardianship and those sort of things. Discuss with the beneficiaries if they can agree on certain assets. Establish the trusts. So I'll explain that later on. There is a whole section on trusts. We'll come to that and explain it. Distribute the estate according to the will. Prepare the final account showing all payments in and out of the estate. And complete the distribution of the estate in 12 months. So that's the maximum time that is allowed by law. In 12 months, they have to complete their job of execution. But your family can wait till that time when this distribution is happening. 12 months. Best executor, you already mentioned quite a few times, it would be your spouse. If there is no will, who can be the executor? Generally, anyone above the age of 18 who goes to the Supreme Court and makes an application, the Supreme Court can grant them the certificate of administration, that they can administer your property. It can also be a next of kin. It can, if a person entitled to a share of the estate is not available, the court can appoint another person or body to do that. So these people will be called administrators rather than executors. This was a question asked by one of the brothers.
I have a quick question regarding most of the financial institutions like the bank and the super. You always have nominees of your beneficiaries in case of your death. And if you miss something or if there is a conflicting information written on your will, so how legally you can handle that?
Yeah. So whatever you have mentioned will be able to take precedence as far as my research goes. So, for example, in the case of superannuation or something, if you have nominated a person, then the superannuation company would give to those beneficiaries rather than your estate. If you have to come to the estate, then there is a particular type of binding nomination that you can do with your superannuation funds. Now, this question we have already discussed. What happens if an executor dies or is unwilling? If you have got nominated multiple people, then the next person in line would become the executor. If the executor started the job and dies, then the person who becomes that person's executor would execute your property and your will as well. Again, we wouldn't spend too much time on the detail of this as we have briefly explained this already. So the Supreme Court gives three types of approvals. Probate, when a person died and he or she left a will in which executors were nominated, then the Supreme Court would grant the grant of probate. Then they can issue the letter of administratorship, where a person has died, and the person left a will, but did not nominate any executors in that one. So in that case, someone has to go and get the letter of administratorship. Then the third one is that the person can leave a will as well and doesn't nominate anyone. In that case, anyone can go and apply. If the court considers it appropriate, the court can grant the application of administratorship. I know it's a little bit boring and dry, so if you feel that we need to repeat something or something is not clear, please let me know. How to apply for probate? You go to the Supreme Court, you present the actual will, the actual or original will, and you fill an affidavit and the associated documents and then submit to the court, and then in some weeks you will give you the grant of probate. Death certificate would be required as well. So there are two documents in that regard. One is the certificate that outlines the cause of death, and the second one is the actual death certificate, which is obtained after the funeral. So in that, basically, you have to submit it to the application for probate. And you have to submit that affidavit in front of the authorized person. And there are other requirements as well. So you can read through them in the presentation. The summary of it is that the application has to be submitted to the Supreme Court along with the actual will and the affidavit and the required documentation. and then they would grant the probate so that the executor can start its job.
But if there is will executor, then still you have to go to the Supreme Court, or no need to go to the Supreme Court to do the thing. But if you have a will, you have executor, everything, still you have to follow the court procedure. Or?
Yeah, still we have to go to the court because the court would then transfer the ownership and so on. So the letter of probate, we can go to the bank and tell that my friend or my brother or my loved one has died, and that's the letter of probate. So I need to access his accounts or her accounts. Then the bank would give you the account. Similar, same case as happened with the property and so on. So it's
If you
pretty
have a
common.
joint account, then there is no need to go to joint account.
Yeah. So joint account is a separate thing. So what happens in the case of joint account is that when one partner dies, all of it automatically gets transferred to the other person. And same is the case with some of the property agreements as well, which we will shortly see.
Just one clarification. So even if on the will we have mentioned the executor, we still need to apply for.
Yep. We have to go there so that the court gives us a letter which we can then take to different institutions and get hold of the property. Otherwise, the bank wouldn't know us and wouldn't allow us to access the thing.
This joint thing, joint account thing, is this Islamically valid that it gets transferred automatically to?
Islamically, it's not valid because in that case, all of your possessions would go to whoever your joint partner in the account was. And Islamically, there are shares for children as well, there are shares for other people as well. Unless that person is an executor and that person realizes his or her Islamic responsibilities and divides that according to Islamic principles. Requisition.
Now the will needs to be registered somewhere, or we just the will needs to be registered somewhere, or we just fill it in and give it to you.
I request you to pause this question and there is a section at the end and we'll explain that. Requisition. Sometimes when you go to the court and request for the grant of probate, they might ask you additional questions. So that those additional questions are called requisition, and they would not grant you administratorship or probate unless you satisfactorily answer those requisitions or request to answer those questions. So the next section, Article 4 of our will, is about arbitration. So sometimes it can happen that dispute can arise in the will. One partner says that I need this much, other person says no, I need this much, and so on. Or I need the house and you take the factory. Or the other person says no, I take the factory and you take the house. And a dispute arises. So in that case, we have to nominate an arbitrator. Arbitrator has to be a neutral person, a pious person, a neutral person who would judge things Islamically and then make the ruling. And then the decision of arbitrator in most, according to law, in most legal situations is binding. So whatever the arbitrator says is binding. So in order to resolve the cases outside the court, you can have an arbitrator or a few arbitrators who can then decide on your behalf. It can be someone neutral, like a person who does not have a share in your estate. It can be a reliable friend, a trustworthy friend, or a local imam, or a scholar, or a local body, and those, or an organization, and those bodies can then do the decision on your behalf. So that's called arbitration. So Article 4 of our will is about arbitration.
Sorry, what are the local organizations that can do arbitration, or?
You can put iCAN, for example, Islamic Center of Australia, New Zealand. You can put Australian National Imams Council. You can put Islamic Council of Western Australia. After talking to them, if they are willing to be the arbitrator, because some of the organizations agree to be the arbitrators and some don't. So if they are in a position and they agree, you can put their name. For example, in US, Islam and ICAN, they offer the arbitrary service as well. And I'm sure there would be local organizations, other local organizations as well, which would be able to do the arbitration.
Excuse me?
Yes, please.
Can an executor be an arbitrator?
No. So it has to be a neutral person.
Okay.
Yeah. So that if a dispute happens between the different parties, then that person can take a neutral dispute. Now another very important topic. We haven't compiled that list as such, but whichever organization you prefer, you can go to them and they might tell you that whether they do that or not. Maybe you can either contact IPDC or you can contact Australian National Imams Council. So they would probably be able to let you know if they offer the arbitration or not. And I most probably they would. So Article 5 in our will is about arbitration. Guardianship. So some of the important aspects that we have to keep in consideration when appointing a guardian. So again, just to break the monotony, I read some brothers and request them to read it.
A guardian is someone appointed to exercise parental responsibilities for a child who is under the age of 18 years or who has special needs. A guardian is appointed in two ways, by parents' will or by court. If one of the parents is alive, nomination of a guardian through will of one parent cannot take effect in WA, but not in all states.
So what basically it says is that you can nominate a guardian through your will, and court would most probably respect your will and then allocate that person the right of guardianship. But if one parent is alive, sometimes it can happen that unfortunately families separate, and you mentioned the partner or the mother or the father of the child is still alive, but you nominate that my brother or my sister or my friend would become the guardian. So the court has got all the right to give the child to the biological mother or biological father if they are willing to be the guardian of the case. So even if you try to outweigh that in the will, it wouldn't take into effect. Now the question is, who can be a guardian? So guardian can be anyone over the age of 18 who has got the willingness and ability to be the guardian. If they have got these two factors, then they can become the guardian. Typically, a person will appoint a close relative or a friend who has the similar life values and follow the similar beliefs and so on. So if you look at this particular article in our will, we have nominated a few people as the guardians of our children. The first one is the spouse. So we say that our spouse, and we mention the name and identity, that person will be the guardian of my children. And then the second clause says that if that person doesn't outlive me or is not able to become the guardian, then my then the child's adult siblings would become the guardians if they are above the age of 18 and willing to be the guardians. So they can become the guardians as well. And if they are no adult siblings or they are not willing, then we nominate a few other people that they can become the guardians of my children. It's very, very important to nominate them. Another clause that we have put in there says that my children should not be indoctrined into any other religion. I was just discussing with a couple of brothers the other day that there are very few people in the Muslim community who are willing to keep in their house other people's children. If the parents die, or if the parents separate, or because of some reason children are separated from their parents, there are not many Muslim volunteer families who are willing to be the foster carers or take care of the child or take the guardianship of the children. What happens then? The court would judge where the kids have to go. It might not necessarily be the Muslim families. It might be the families who adhere to the values that we do not adhere to. It might be that they might indoctrine people into the atheistic beliefs. So these sort of things can be. So just to protect ourselves from that, in our will we have written that our children should not be indoctrinated into any of the religion or the atheistic values and other aspects.
How does that protect it though? Does someone follow up?
Sorry?
How does that protect it? Does someone follow up?
So it doesn't guarantee the protection, but it's just like a safety factor that if that happens to our kid and it's identified that they are indoctrining them into certain belief system, then our relatives and so on can challenge the court that it's against the will and so on. And it has happened in the past, like Muslim kids going to non-Muslim families. And we know we can all assess and estimate what will happen to the beliefs of them.
Can a guardian be someone from overseas?
Sorry?
Can a guardian be someone from overseas?
Guardian can be from somewhere overseas, yes. According to my research, it can be. But there, the court would have certain factors to consider before it allows the guardianship. Some of the factors are the lifestyle choices and so on. Financial aspect is another thing. And there are a number of factors that the court would see. And if the court considers that that person is suitable, only then they would approve the guardianship.
Even if I need them in the will as well?
Yes, even if it's in the will. So the final decision lies with the court.
Please repeat the question and then answer.
The question was that can someone from overseas be the guardian? So the answer is that as per my research, extensive research on the topic, I couldn't see anything that would restrict overseas people from becoming guardians. But what we have come across is that the court would assess a number of factors before approving the application. So just like lifestyle choices, the well-being of the kids, the financial situation of the person who would be the guardian, their physical condition and so on, all these things will be assessed by court before approving. So better it is that if we have someone local who can take care and that person is trustworthy, that's the best solution. Do you have a question?
Yeah, same question.
What happens if the person I have appointed as the guardian of my children dies or otherwise unable to perform their duties as guardians? If this happens before you die, you should do a new will. Like if you know that I nominated someone and that person has died, make a new will. If it happens after you die, and the other parent of the children is no longer living or able to look after the children, a court will have to determine who looks after them as a guardian. And then the court would look into multiple factors. So, just as a side point, what we should do as a community is that we should have very close bonding with each other, and we should know what's happening in our families. If someone needs a help or not, what's happening to someone's kids. If someone is sick, we can go and help them. So we should have that community bonding, and we should be very willing to help each other. So with that, we can avoid a lot of problems like this. Article 6 is about debt. So, Islamic belief, this is the sequence in which the things have to go out of our estate after we die. The first expense that has to be taken out is the takfeen and tadfeen. Takfeen means the shrouding and tadfeen means the burial. So these expenses are the first ones that have to come out of our estate. Then, second one is all debts. All debts have to be paid back. Third one is the wasiya. And don't worry about it because we'll explain it later on what it is. And the fourth one is the residual estate, which has to be distributed to our heirs. But you can see that the second one in this list is the debt. Yeah, we can have 5 minutes break inshallah, but please either stay here or be back on time so that we can conclude it by 1 p.m. inshallah. So 5 minutes break inshallah.
मैंने व्हाट्सएप किया आपको वो अकाउंट की इंफॉर्मेशन
Sorry, I know you have stuff to do in the break, but just a quick question. I know you covered this let's say for instance, is that something in the scope or is
We don't have much more than what we covered in the executive. The executive will have to have the right documentation. International bills will cover that. We will come to that in the last section.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Can we do it?
बच्चे साहब अपने काम कर रहे हैं तो बच्चे बच्चे ही सुबह में नहीं अल्लाह का शुक्र अच्छा है सही से ठीक है हाँ वो क्या कहते हैं इतना कहा हाँ मैंने आपको कंफर्म कर दिया मोहित भाई भी आ रहे हैं वो हैं आमिर भाई भी मैं भी जानते हैं हाँ
how many copies?
Assalamu alaikum. So we will start in 1 minute. So can you please come back, have a seat, we will start now. On screen, you can see the iCAN Center account, and this is an optional contribution. We have expenses for the printing and other stationery. So if you want to contribute, these are the bank details, so you can contribute. This is optional.
Just about this one, brothers. So we are not charging anything for this. So it's $10, which is optional. If you want to pay it, you can. If you don't, that's fine as well. And from this, we'll only take the cost price, the cost of printing, and everything else will inshallah go to the orphan support program of Crescent Relief. So the reason we put this little $10 thing was so that from this session we can support a few orphans as well, inshallah. So all of it would go to the orphans except the cost price that we have. And while you guys are noting that down, I would just explain that in order to sponsor an orphan, it takes approximately $50 a month. So if you want to donate, you can please feel free and you can donate to a number of organizations help in that regard. Crescent Relief, we have also got Muslim Aid Australia, we have got Human Appeal. So you can donate to any of the organizations that you prefer. So if you have noted the details, we'll inshallah move on to the presentation. Inshallah, we'll continue with the presentation. Alright, so before the break, we were discussing about debts. So it is extremely important for Muslims to pay off their debt before the funeral happens. It's extremely important. And there are a number of ahadith, number of traditions of the Prophet ﷺ which emphasize on this aspect. they used to come for the funeral. The Prophet used to ask that, is there anyone who can pay off their debt? Or sometimes he did not offer their prayer unless someone paid off their debt. So it's extremely important that we should try to pay our debts as soon as possible. So our debts have also to go out of our estate. Another very alarming thing is that the soul of the believer remains suspended unless the debt is paid off. So it's very, very important and very, very alarming. Similarly, with regards to shuhada, the people who give up their lives in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hadith says that all their sins are forgiven except the debt. So they again are reliant on the debt to be paid off in order for them to achieve the status that they understand. So we have to pay not only the debts to people, but also the debts we owe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are a number of traditions in that regard. For example, there is a woman who had to do a Hajj, and his son came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked that should I do the Hajj or the pilgrimage for my mother? And the Prophet ﷺ said that yes, do that. The right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes precedence over everything. Similarly, there was a woman who had to offer 1 month of fasting, and it was said to the ayahs that they should fast or they should pay off the debt on her mother's behalf. So we have to pay the debt to the people, and we have to pay the debt that we owe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Islamic countries, if they are run by the Islamic law, then the state takes care of the debt. So according to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whatever a person leaves is for the heirs, and if they have got any debt, the Prophet ﷺ said that I take care of that, the state will take care of that. But as unfortunately we don't have many countries which have got a true form of Islamic law being implemented, so this is the responsibility of the individual to pay off from the state or of the community to help the person pay off the debt. Legal perspective, the debts that we owe in our life remain our debt after we die. So if I owe bank some $100,000 or something, when I die, it doesn't get waived off. It has to be taken, or it would be taken from my estate. So the bank or the lender would make a claim against my estate that this much amount is due. And the executor has to deal with that situation as well, and then pay off the debt from the state. So that is the job of the executor as well. Now there can be a situation if a person is really poor, and the person has got a lot of debt, and the person dies. So the person doesn't have enough in the state to pay off the debt. What would happen in that case? So legally what happens is that whatever can be taken out of the state will be taken out, even if it consumes the whole state. And if there is something still left over, then that would be considered as the bankruptcy. So the state would be considered as bankrupt, and the loan would not get transferred on to the heirs. Like the loan that I take, my sons won't have to pay for that legally. But Islamically, we discussed that the loan has to be paid off. Otherwise, our soul would remain suspended. So Islamically, we have to pay off the loan. So the community should try to chip in and try to relieve that person by paying off the debts. So legally, I can get away with my loans if I don't pay them. My state will be bankrupt, and that's it. But Islamically, we have to pay them. Tax on the state. So executor has to pay the tax on the state, and this bit we have already covered. So there are two forms of tax that they will pay. If there is any pending tax returns, they have to do that. And also, on the day that a person dies, tax up to that point has to be paid as well. Now we come to bequests. So Islamically, there are two things that we have to keep in mind. One thing is called irth, and the second one is called wasiyah. Now these are two very different things. Irth is that the rights of the inheritance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger have defined very clearly. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala there's a long ayah in which all the shares of the inheritance have been defined. That mother would get this much, the wife would get this much, the children would get this much, the male children would get this much, the female children would get this much. All of it is very clearly explained in the Quran and Sunnah. So these are the rights. Wasiyah is if you have to give anything else to any of the non-heirs. You cannot give a wasiyah to your heirs. For example, if I've got one son, and a significant portion of my estate is going to him, and then I give the remaining 33% to him as well. So the wasiyah cannot be given to the heirs. It can be done for the non-heirs. Like for example, there's a relative of yours who is very poor, and that person does not inherit from you. So you can give 5% or 10% to that poor relative. Might be your sister who is not, if she's not among the heirs, might be your cousin, might be your uncle or someone. So if you want to give someone any amount and they are not the heirs, you can put them in the wasiyah. For the heirs, the shares are very clearly defined by the Quran and Sunnah. So these are two important rules. So in Islamic countries, in Muslim countries, if they have got a system where the amount is distributed Islamically, like in Pakistan, from where I come, there's a system, and I'm not aware of other countries, unfortunately. So if there's a system, your will would only contain information about the bequests, which would be a maximum of 33%. But in the countries where the Islamic law is not implemented, then your will would have two components. One component of the wasiyah, which is optional, and then one component dealing with the distribution of the shares in the estate, the heirs element of it. So like in Australia, our will has to have both these elements. That is why the section that we are dealing with now, which is section 7 is about the bequests, and then section 8 is about heirs. So both these sections have to be in our will. So at the moment we are discussing section 7. Question: how much of the component of our estate we can bequest other than the heirs? So the answer is it's a maximum of 1/3. Maximum of 1/3. There was a companion who, when he was dying, the Prophet ﷺ was close to him, next to him, and he wanted to donate everything that he had in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that was the love that the companions had for the religion. That they wanted to donate everything that they had for their religion. And I'll just recite a verse, a poetic verse in Urdu, and then I'll explain that in English. There was a very famous poet in India, Pakistan. His name was Allama Dr. Muhammad Iqbal. And he says, बुलबुल को है चराग, परवाने को है चराग, बुलबुल को फूल बस, सिद्दीक के लिए है खुदा का रसूल बस. What it means is that the flowers love, the beautiful birds love the flowers and so on. But for Siddiq, Abu Bakr Siddiq, only the Prophet of Allah is enough. So as he gave everything that he had for the religion. So the companion wanted to donate all of his possessions for the need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Prophet said that do not leave the children poor. Do not leave the children poor. And the companion kept on reducing, and the Prophet ﷺ kept on saying, do not leave your children poor. Leave them something. Because there are two things in Islam. One is the level of azima, and the second one is the level of rukhsa. For example, how much of your money do you have to donate? The level of rukhsa is that you donate 2.5% of your wealth as a zakah to the relevant recipients, and then you have fulfilled your responsibility. That's the level of rukhsa. But the level of azima is that Siddiq ke liye hai Khuda ka Rasul, that you give everything that you have. So the Prophet ﷺ said that for you is the level of rukhsa. Do not leave your children poor. Leave them something. So the maximum allowed in Sharia accordingly is 33%. 33% of your wealth you can give to the charitable causes, you can give in the continued charity projects, Sadaqah Jariyah, you can help some relatives and so on. As I mentioned already, the bequest cannot be done for the legal heirs, and it cannot be spent on illegal purposes. Like you give it to an organization which does something illegal or un-Islamic in that. You cannot give to such organizations. Ongoing charity. Now, whatever you are bequesting as a part of it would be an ongoing charity for you. So, from this hadith we come to know that when we die, all of our good deeds cease. All of our good deeds cease, except the continued charity. And it has got various forms. One of the forms is the righteous children that we leave behind us. Another form is that we do spend on those things which remain in service after we die. It can be a useful knowledge. You can help build a university. You can help build a library. You can help build an organization that will nurture the next generation of the Muslims and try to preserve the Iman of the people. So these are the things that will be the continued charity after we die. Once the Prophet ﷺ sacrificed a sheep. A sheep was sacrificed. And Hazrat Aisha, she was distributing it to whoever was coming. And the whole meat was distributed. But she just preserved the shoulder. Shoulder of the animal. And when the Prophet ﷺ came, and he asked that, oh Aisha, what is left? So she said the shoulder is left. Because the Prophet ﷺ liked to eat the meat of the shoulder. So she said the shoulder is left, everything else is given away. So the Prophet ﷺ gave a very beautiful statement. He said that everything else remains but the shoulder. So whatever you have given in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that remains. Only the shoulder is going to perish. So that's the importance of the ongoing charity. In the will, there is a section which talks about the wasiyah. So we have made 5 boxes. So you can either nominate to an organization or you can nominate it to some of the relatives or some of the people that you would like to help. And in that we have also written Islamic Circle of Australia and New Zealand, our organization. So if you want to give whatever percentage of your estate to iCAN for the continued charity, feel free, most welcome. Inshallah, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that it becomes a sadaqah jariyah. Even if it's a small percentage, 0.5%, 1%, whatever it is. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for that. Then comes the Article 8, which is the distribution of the residue. In that, there is a long list of rules. But considering the session that we are having today, it might not be suitable to go through all the rules. But I'll just explain the gist of a few of them. There are some things which Islamically prevent people from becoming a waris, the person who receives the inheritance. There are few things, if they happen, a person cannot be an inheritor. One of those things is that if someone kills me, if my child or my spouse or someone, these things can happen. If that person is involved in killing me, then that person cannot become an heir. Similarly, Islamically, a person cannot inherit, a Muslim cannot inherit from a non-Muslim, and a non-Muslim cannot inherit from a Muslim. So, Islamically, the inheritance does not happen among the people who have got different faiths. So, that is why in our will we have made one of the clauses that no non-Muslim heirs of mine, no non-Muslim dependents of mine would become an heir in my will, after my will. So, this is Islamically the ruling. So Islamically, that person cannot be given the share of your will. But the problem over here is that if you do not give a share to someone, then that person will go to the court and challenge your will.
In that case, are you allowed Islamically to actually request some of the will to that person?
Correct. So this is what we are discussing now. So Islamically, that person cannot have the is, cannot have the inheritance component of it. But you can bequest still something to a non-Muslim relative, And the reason for that is if you don't do that, then that person would go to the court and challenge the will. And the court would consider that. The court would say that it was the legal biological son and still it's not given the inheritance. So then the case can get complicated. So it might be better to request something to them, whatever you like, if you consider properly. But if you think that it cannot be challenged, they would not go to the court and contest your will, then Islamically they will not have a share in inheritance. Again, without going into much detail, I'll just explain that there are 4 recipients of the heirs. Whatever the inheritance that we leave, there are 4 main recipients of that. One of them are the Faraid. These are the people whose shares are clearly defined in the Quran. And for some of them in Sunnah, they are very clearly defined that what percentages they would get. These are called the Zabil Faraids. Then there are some which are the residual heirs. Whatever is paid out to these people, whatever remains, goes out to these people. These are called Asaba or the residual heirs. And then whatever is left over, in some situation, goes to Zabil Arham. If there are no Asaba, then it goes to Zabil Arham, the close relatives. And if none of them are available, it goes to the Baitul Mal in the Islamic countries. Over here, you can nominate an Islamic organization to have all of it. Rather than all of it going to the state, you can give it to the Islamic organization of your choice. So these are the 4 main recipients in an Islamic will. So we wouldn't go into much detail, and we haven't mentioned much details in the will itself. But with the will, we have given you a document, an additional document, which is called Schedule A. So that Schedule A enlists all the different percentages of the shares. And we have mentioned in this article that the shares should be calculated as per that schedule. So then whoever is calculating the shares would Islamically calculate that as per that schedule. In that section, we have also mentioned that a local Islamic scholar should be contacted in order to calculate the shares, because it's a very complex matter and there are a lot of scenarios that can happen. Like if you have got only daughters, how much they would get? If you have got only one daughter, how much would she get? If you have got only sons, how much would they get? If you have got sons and daughters, how much would they get? If your partner is alive, if your partner is not alive, all these different scenarios have to be taken into consideration and it requires calculations from an expert. So that is why in the will we have written that a local Islamic scholar should be engaged, and you can select the school of thought of that scholar, and then that scholar would calculate the shares with you. Some brothers asked a question about the property, what would happen with the houses? Yes.
From a legal perspective, you can assign shares to overseas or non-Australian?
Yes, we can. So we can assign a share overseas, but with regards to non-Muslim, they can have a bequest component, but not the heirs. Alright, now with regards to the properties, there are 2 types of agreements. Those brothers who have already made their houses or who have a plan to make their houses, so they would be interested in this. There are 2 types of agreements. One of the agreements is joint tenants. The second one is tenants in common. In joint tenants, if one person dies, like if the husband and wife are the joint tenants, if one of them died, all of it would get handed over to a live person. If one of the joint tenants died, all the property gets transferred over to the one who is still alive. That's joint tenants. In the tenants in common, you guys would have certain shares. Like 50% share is mine, 50% share is my wife's share. When I die, 50% of my share would become the part of the estate, and then it would be distributed Islamically. And then my wife would get a share of it, my children would get a share of it, and if there are any other relatives or Asaba or Zabil Arham that come into that, then they would get their own share. So this is about the property. Now the question is, should you write all your assets in your will? That I have got a bank account which have got this much money. I have got shares in this, and this company, and this is the amount that I have in that. I have got like a superannuation fund, and it has got. Should you list all those things in there? The preferred answer is that we shouldn't. The reason for that is that they will keep on changing. So the word that you should use is the residual estate, and it would encompass everything that you have. But having said that, you should have a list of all your possessions which you should give to your executor. And if it's updated, if you get something new, or if you sell off something, cut it off and put the new one. So that when they become the executor, they know exactly where do they have to go, which banks they have to go, which superannuation company they have to go, which land gate, property or land they have to take care of. So all these things have to be very clear to them. Joint accounts, already explained, it's just like the joint tenants. If one of the account holder dies, it automatically goes to the remaining account holder. Death insurance, just a disclaimer with that many of the scholars do not consider it to be an acceptable practice Islamically. Any payout under the policy will be paid directly to the nominated beneficiaries rather than your estate. If you nominated yourself or your legal personal representative, i.e. the executor, as the beneficiary, the payout on your policy will be made to your executive and will form part of your estate. So if you have got a death insurance, then you should nominate yourself or your executor as beneficiary. Testamentary trust. Now, if I die today and I have got kids who are very young, and those kids inherit certain percentage, what would happen? Can my 3-year-old take care of the property that will come to him or her? It's not very feasible for them, or they are not in the capacity or ability to take care of those possessions. So what happens in that case? We can form what is called a testamentary trust. So it's very easy to form that as a part of the will. But if we have to form it when we are alive, it has got a lot of legal complications. But if we want to form it as a part of the will, it's very easy. You just mention about the trust in your will, and whoever you nominate would become the trustee, and the property of the minors would be in that trust. And on that, you can put a condition that when my kids reach the age of 18, which is also called the age of majority, when they reach the age of majority, then the property should be handed over to them. And it's an Islamic practice as well. Islamically also you can handle the property of the orphans. So it's an Islamic practice, and there is a strong emphasis Islamically regarding being very mindful of the amana that has been given to us. The property of the orphans that we are managing, there are very clear guidelines about that. Like what we can take from that and what we can't. What sort of maintenance we can claim from that and not. And how should we care for that? Even Islam also allows us to invest that in something that can bring some benefit to the orphans. So all these guidelines are clear. And in our will, we have mentioned about the testamentary trust and also the power of the trustee to be able to invest those assets. And in our will, we have nominated the guardian of the children as the trustee. Whoever the kids are living with, that person would be the guardian as well as the trustee of their funds. But if you want to change it and give it to someone else, you can do that. But we consider the guardian to be the most suitable person for managing the share of the orphans. As I mentioned, there can be a fee for being the trustee of the property of the minors. So if you want, you can allocate a certain percentage on a monthly basis or an annual basis that you are taking care of my kids and also managing the property. So this much share would be yours. So if you want, you can nominate something. There are other reasons for creating a trust as well. One is the minors. Another one is that there is a person with some sort of a mental disability. That person cannot manage his or her own things. So then you can put that money in the trust. And trust has got some other benefits as well. Not Islamic benefits, but financial benefits. And one of them is, for example, if the person is about to get bankrupt. So you put that, the share of that person in the trust, and that would give the protection. Otherwise, bankruptcy would take away that person's all possessions and so on. And there can be other things as well. So there can be numerous benefits of trusts. Superannuation, we have already discussed a little bit. Usually it's our biggest asset, unless we have got some properties which are bigger than this. Usually superannuation is the biggest asset at the time of death. It does not automatically become the part of the estate. So you have to have a binding nomination to yourself or your estate, and then it will become the part of the estate. Otherwise, you would put the beneficiaries that you have nominated in your superannuation account. If you want it to be distributed Islamically, you have to make sure that the state receives that. And more information on that you can receive from your relevant superannuation company. And there are some Islamic companies which do that as well, like we have got Crescent Wealth, which offers the Islamic superannuation. Similarly, we have got Hijaz, and there will be other institutions as well. So I think it's much better to invest it Islamically, because it is one of the biggest things that you would get at the time after our retirement or after our death. It would be one of the biggest savings. So it has to be Islamically lawful. So I would recommend, if you haven't considered that already, consider depositing your superannuation with one of the Islamic organizations like Crescent Relief, Crescent Wealth, or Hijaz Finance. We are just about to finish. We are at the second last clause, which is about the severability. Now, what is that clause all about? So, it can happen that some clause in our will might be rejected by the court, that this is not enforceable, not implementable. So, it should not mean that all the will is cancelled. So, this clause says that if one of the clauses is considered to be like unimplementable, the other clauses would still remain in place. So, separability. Each clause has to be considered separately. International will. Now we'll see some of the things that we need to do in order to have our will accepted internationally. And if we have got any property overseas and so on, so we'll make an international will rather than a local will. And the thing is that the differences are not many. So just to make people not thinking, I request someone to do.
Acceptability of studying will overseas. Most probably yes, but check with the laws in the overseas country. Acceptability is further established by the International Wills Convention, applicable in Australia from 2015 in only certain countries.
So there is a convention, international convention, which came together and decided that certain wills would be accepted internationally. In Australia as well as overseas. And they stipulated certain guidelines. If the will meets these requirements, then it would be acceptable. So what are the requirements? The will must only be made by one person in writing. You can also have mutual wills, like husband and wife making one will together. But it wouldn't be accepted internationally. So it has to be made by one single person. Testator, the person making the will, to declare his or her will by signing in the presence of two witnesses and a person authorized to act in connection with the international will. So the first component of the statement is already in practice. So we would be signing in front of two witnesses. The additional thing that we need is that we have to sign someone in front of someone who's authorized to act in the capacity of authorizing the international wills. And there is a list of people who can do that, some of the authorized people, and you can go in front of them and then make your will, and they will authorize that. A person authorized to act in connection with an international will is an Australian legal practitioner. You can go to a solicitor or you can go to a court and seek their help. A public notary of any Australian jurisdiction, acting person who is acting as an authorized person under the law of the state. So the state might authorize other people as well. So you will go in front of them and make the will. The authorized person and the witnesses are to sign the will in the presence of testator. So we previously discussed that you and the witnesses have to be together at the time of signing. Now this fourth fellow is in there as well. So you four are together and then you sign the will. The authorized person is to attach to the will a certificate in the form or in a similar manner. So the Wills Act 1970 that we referred to earlier, it has got a form. So you can either take print out of that form, or the practitioner or the approved person might have that form already with them, and then they can fill that form. And it also stipulates a few requirements. Almost all of them we read in our will, so you can just go and do in front of a notary public or in front of another authorized person, and then your will will be accepted internationally. But there are some countries which might have got their own country-specific requirements. Because I think in Pakistan there is a particular format on which is called stamp paper or something, and on that we have to print the will. So countries might have their own specific requirement, but generally all the countries that have signed on to that convention would be able to accept the will that is made in this book. Acceptance of a foreign will in Australia. Not much description in this. It's the same thing. If a will was made internationally and it meets all the requirements that we stipulated in the previous slide, then it's accepted in Australia as well. If you make a will in your own country of origin, for example, if I'm from Pakistan, if I make a will in Pakistan and I meet all these requirements, then the will is acceptable in Australia as well. Power of attorney. If you want, give someone an ability to make decisions on your behalf when you are alive. You can give them the power of attorney. It can be an enduring power of attorney or a generic one. You can give them for some certain aspects to be taken care of, or you can give it for all the things for a continued period. So you can choose. That form is not a part of the will, but if you guys want, we can supply you the forms for that as well. And inshallah, we'll try to attach it in the email that we will send after the session. It would have the will, the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll also include the forms in there, the power of attorney.
Is the power valid even after your death? I mean, like, so I die and given the
I don't think it is, but I need to double check. I think it's not applicable.
because then it would be that thing
Yes,
given by the
executive. Now you can also have other documents like enduring power of guardianship. Like it can happen that we are unable to make decisions at our own. For example, a person gets into a coma, for example, cannot decide at his or her own. Then if you want the enduring power of guardianship, then the person who happened to give that power would be able to take decisions on our behalf. Like, should we be treated in a particular hospital? Should we be treated at home? Should they be doing certain treatment on our body? When to pull the plug? All those sort of decisions they can take. Storing the will. Many brothers and sisters ask this question that where should we store the will? So legally there is no requirement to submit the will anywhere or to store it somewhere. So as long as it's a valid will, you can keep it with yourself as well and it's still valid and applicable. But it can sometimes lead to confusion, and if it gets contested in court, people can question that maybe this is a forged will and so on. So the best approach is that you store it in the will bank. There is a WA will bank which provides the free services. So you make your will, you deposit it with them, and it's a free service. So why not use it? It's a government service, it's free of cost, so I think we should use it.
Is it online also?
No, I think it's a physical copy that we have to keep. Now, someone has died and you are an executor. Where should you find the will? Ideally, your executor should have the will. You should give a copy of the will to the executor and also tell them that that this is where the original will is stored, so that they can get it from there. But if that is not the case, you can find it on the descendants or the deceased papers and documents. The deceased bank might have the will if that person deposited over there. The insurance company, the lawyer, accountant, public trustee, and so on and so forth. So you can try to search from all these avenues that where is the actual will. Conclusion. So with this we have concluded our will, and I would again like to emphasize that we have covered whatever we have written in this will. We have tried to go through all the points, and inshallah when you would read this will, you would note that all these things have been adequately discussed in the session. And also with this, you should definitely have the schedule. If you have just taken the will and not the schedule, the will is incomplete. So both these documents have to go together, because this is the schedule in which the shares are mentioned, that who would get what. And you can see that in this will, on each page the testator and both the witnesses have to sign. On every page of the will, the testator and the witnesses have to sign. If you cut out any clause, or if you amend any clause, or if you make a selection, then you and the witnesses have to sign there. So that is what is required for this will to be valid. If it is not in the presence of the witnesses, not signed in the presence of witnesses, it would not be valid. This schedule is also a part of the will. The will mentions that Schedule A is the part of the will. So even though it doesn't have the spaces for signature, so you and the witnesses have to sign this as well on each page. It might be a little bit of a physical exercise to do this many signatures, but this is required for this will to be valid. Each page of this has to be signed by the testator as well as by the witnesses. And same is the case with the will. And once you are done with that, in the presence of witnesses, you can then store it in the WA bank or store it securely somewhere and inform your executor. So with this we conclude the session. But before finalizing the session, I would just like to briefly explain about why we have organized the session. So this session is organized by Islamic Circle of Australia and New Zealand, and we are a volunteer organization. So all the people in our organization are volunteers. We do not charge anything for our services. All of us are working somewhere and have got our day-to-day life as well. But we consider religion and the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be the most important aspect of our life. That is why we have decided to volunteer and give